Our guest today is Judge James Gray. James Gray has been a trial judge in California since 1983. Prior to that, he served as a federal prosecutor and also worked as a private attorney. He is an outspoken member of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, an agency that works to combat America's failed drug policy. As a champion of this cause, he has written a very provocative book, Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It. We're very lucky to have him here today. Thank you for coming.
Well, Desiree, thank you, and you've certainly done your homework. It's nice to be with you.
Well, thank you. I would like to know, you were a federal prosecutor, and then you were a trial judge, and I guess in your bio I read that you presided over one of the largest busts to date in California.
Actually, yeah, that was as a prosecutor, where I actually prosecuted what was then the largest drug case in the Central District of California, which was 75 kilos of heroin, which of course was and is a lot of heroin. It's about 160 pounds. But then I go on to say, do you know what the record prosecution is today? It's 17 tons of cocaine in one place. So you can tell how successful we are in keeping this stuff out of our country.
So how does one go from federal prosecutor prosecuting drug offenses to a member
of LEAP,
advocate of LEAP?
Which is Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. It was a slow process. As I say, I considered myself formerly to be a drug warrior, hadn't really thought about it that much, but I was raised pretty much the same way that all of us were raised, to equate heroin, for example, with evil, with bad, with prison. But soon, in my own courtroom, you just see us churning low-level drug offenders through the system for no good purpose, pushing them farther away from the medical professionals that can help them instead of bringing them closer. And so I formulated the idea that it's really a function of the criminal justice system to hold people accountable for what they do, for their actions, but not what they put into their bodies. And so I did speak out back in 1992, my conclusions, as based upon my experience, that what we're doing simply wasn't working, and easily no one could almost refute that there had to be a better way. And we've been talking about it ever since.
I remember in the 70s, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. We had a police chief at this time who said that 60% of all crime was drug related. And the solution was pretty straitjacketed back then, you know, catch the culprits, throw them in jail.
Sure.
I doubt the statistic is any better today, and the method has not changed.
Honestly, in Orange County, I think you would get most criminal court judges to agree that about 80% of all felony crime is drug-related crime. Maybe half of that is trying to procure the drugs or the violence that goes along with the drug trade, and the other half is the money that people who are using the drugs try to get in order to buy their artificially expensive drugs. Mm-hmm. So I'm not condoning using any of these drugs. I never have. You could legalize them and bless them by every religious leader in town, and I'm still not going to jam cocaine up my nose. But, you know, it's here. And so we have to decide that we should manage the problem instead of moralize about it, because moralizing has filled our prisons. You know, we in the United States lead the world in the incarceration of our people. We have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the prisoners. And, by the way, it does not take a sociologist to determined that going through any jail or prison in our country, that the people of color are abnormally highly represented in our jails and prisons. It's just not what our country stands for. There does have to be a better way, and fortunately there is.
Well, in your book, you speak about the supply being regulated by the demand in this country. Do you think that this country has a disproportionately large amount of drug use?
Oh, it clearly does. The United States of America has a more radical drug prohibition policy really than any other Western industrialized country, and we have a worse drug problem than any other Western industrialized country, and I'm completely convinced that there's a connection. For example, you go to Holland, and Holland decriminalized marijuana and actually other drugs back in the 70s, and the Minister of Health of Holland, and I cite it in my book as you may have seen, held a press conference and said, we in Holland only have half the marijuana consumption per capita in our country as you do in the United States. Listen to this, both for adults and for teenagers, and then went on to explain why. And you know what he said? We have succeeded in making pot boring. Now, we have glamorized it by making it illegal, and we also, of course, glamorize it by having an absolutely obscene profit motive for children to be selling drugs to children or others to be selling drugs so that we can get you, your neighbors, and your children hooked on these things. So that's a big part of the problem.
I know when I was growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, as I said, it was much easier to get marijuana than it was to get alcohol. You had to get someone's big brother to go to the store for you. And
yes, it still is. And I talk to young adults all the time, and I ask them just that question, Desiree. What is harder for you to get, alcohol or marijuana? And they all agree that alcohol is more difficult to get. Why? I mean, they can get it, of course, but why? Because the alcohol is regulated and controlled by the government, and the illegal marijuana or other drugs are controlled by illegal drug dealers, and they don't ask for ID. So that's pretty apparent that that's the problem. We're facing two substantial problems, and one is drug harms, and I'm not minimizing them. I think that the drugs can be harmful, can be dangerous, can be addictive, but the second is drug money harm, and that by far is a much worse problem than the drugs will ever be. And in fact, the irony of this is, and I know that your cameraman is coming from Colombia, but we could bulldoze the entire country of Colombia, obliterate it from the face of the earth, and take Peru and Ecuador with it if we wanted to, and it wouldn't make any difference at all with regard to our problems here. Why? Because if the demand is here, the demand will be met. And if it's not met by Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, it'll be met by Nigeria or Thailand or Burma, Myanmar Republic, or California. You know what the largest cash crop is today in the state of California? It is?
Marijuana.
Marijuana. Number 2 is grapes. So, you know, it's here. Let's recognize that fact. And we're having Proposition 19 on the ballot this November. And I certainly hope that you and your viewers give serious consideration to supporting it, because it's going to be sold anyway. And today, marijuana is being used as a recruiting tool by juvenile gangs to get kids to come and join their gangs so they too can be part of the action. It's fueling our gang problem, it's fueling our terrorism problem, so it's going to be sold anyway. You don't know what the strength is, you don't know what the quality is, you don't have any age restrictions, etc. Let's bring the marijuana back under the law and allow, in this case, each city to decide how or if it should be sold.
I was going to ask you about Proposition 19. There is in the argument against Proposition 19, they say that, one, I would like you to address this, about getting high up until you get behind the wheel of a car. And how do you rebut this?
Desiree, we're having some scare tactics or some desperation here. The people are ahead of the politicians. The people are ahead of even the editorial boards of newspapers. No one is saying that it's going to change any of the laws regarding driving under the influence. Proposition 19 expressly says it does not change those laws. So if you drive under the influence, arrest them, bring them to me, etc. It doesn't change that. Doesn't change the workplace either. It certainly does, though, change with regard to furnishing or giving or selling marijuana to children. It makes it more strict, and that's, of course, a good thing, too. Mm-hmm. So this is something that should be supported.
Oscar tells me in Colombia, they have no test right now to see if you're high on marijuana, much like the breathalyzer test. He says they make you spit.
Okay.
To see if your mouth is dry, because
all right. There is, I understand, and technology is increasing and good for that. I understand that now there is a swab that you can actually put inside your cheek and in your mouth, and it will determine if you have smoked marijuana in the last 4 hours or not. That would be a good thing. But marijuana, by its nature, is different than alcohol, and it's too bad. It's harder for law enforcement because most of the marijuana tests will basically come like a litmus test. The light's either on or it's off, and if it's on, you've used marijuana in the last 30 days. That does not mean at all that you're under its influence, but that's the best pretty much that your analysis can show. Alcohol is different, as people know. You can take a breathalyzer, and basically if you drink one beer or one glass of wine or one jigger of scotch or whatever, it'll take you about an hour to purge that from your system. And so the breathalyzers will be able to test your blood alcohol pretty well. We don't have anything like that except maybe for this swab, which I don't know that much about, for marijuana. But that problem will continue whether Proposition 19 passes or not. That's a problem that law enforcement has now, and hopefully modern science will be able to help us out here.